Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, we'll be doing something a little bit different, and I'm hoping to do this a lot more. I'm going to be reacting to your DNA results. So if you enjoy this video and you want your results reviewed, be sure to go to my subreddit, GeneaVlogger, and post your question there, whether it's DNA or genealogy related, and I'm going to try to answer it in one of these videos. So let's jump into it. So the first one we have here is from the enabled disabled. DNA results from me and my maternal grandmother. Both me and grandma are Swedish, but I have 2 Danish great-grandmothers and 1 Finnish 4 times great-grandmother. One of the Danish ancestors is her great-grandmother. I have gone back to 1700s and no ancestors in Norway nor any in Scotland. Now I'm assuming that last sentence is supposed to say I have gone back to the 1700s and no ancestors in Norway nor any in Scotland. Basically, why are they getting this Norway and Scotland? Now, there are 2 photos, and it says DNA results from me and my maternal grandmother, so I'm assuming first is from the enabled disabled, second is from the maternal grandmother. So here we have Sweden and Denmark, 61%, Norway 38%, Finland 1%. Now my guess is that it has to do with the difficulty of deciphering Norway from Sweden and Denmark. They are all right there, and I'm sure the population groups have gone in and out of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway for years and years and years. And one thing we can tell right off the bat is that your communities with a connection to this ethnicity region, we see a bunch listed under Sweden and Denmark, but nothing under Norway, even though it's 38%. And that's probably because the Norway really is coming from the Swedish and Denmark. And maybe if you go back far enough, you may start finding some connections to Norway. But more than anything, it's probably just because of the difficulty of trying to decipher Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And in fact, you can see that they don't even try to decipher between Sweden and Denmark. That's one group in of itself. Now, when we go to the second image, which would presumably be the maternal grandmother, this is where we're getting the Scottish. Now for the 5% Scottish, there's a few things that are possibly going on. For one, if the enabled disabled did not get that Scottish, it makes sense because if the grandmother had 5%, it's not unlikely that the enabled disabled didn't inherit any of that Scottish ancestry. So if the maternal grandmother truly has Scottish ancestry and that's coming from one ancestor, then we're going to be looking at about a 2nd or 3rd great grandparent. And being that this would be for the enabled disabled's grandmother, it would be her 2nd or 3rd great grandparent, making it the enabled disabled's 4th or 5th great grandparent. Now, 4th or 5th great grandparent is when you start getting into the 1700s. So if the enabled disabled has truly their entire family tree, every single branch, traced back to the 1700s, then you may be able to figure out, how possible is that Scottish, or even if that Scottish is truly there, where might it be? But again, that's assuming there's one ancestor. So if it's coming from multiple ancestors, then that also means that it's going to be a little bit further back. So technically, even having it traced all the way up to the 1700s may not be good enough to tell whether or not you truly have that Scottish ancestry. But it should be noted that I have seen a lot of people who get Norway, Swedish, and Denmark will sometimes get some sort of Scottish or British Isles or Irish. So it might also just be a difficulty of deciphering it between the Norway and Danish ancestry. Now here we have my grandfather on my dad's side is 1st generation American from Mexico. That would make me 25%. I understand that 25% wouldn't be exact, but close. What smaller numbers would most likely be from my paternal grandfather? Now this is a difficult one really to answer, partially because we don't have the information on the rest of your ancestry. So even though your grandfather is a 1st generation American from Mexico, and that is about 1/4 of your DNA, and you are correct when it comes to the DNA, it's not going to be exactly 1/4 or 25%, it's going to be about. But we would need to know the other expected ancestries based on the rest of your ancestry, the other 3/4. And part of that also has to do with the fact that Mexico is one of those countries that is such a true melting pot of so many different populations from all over the world. But just going through everything that you have, we see indigenous America's north Indigenous Americas, Mexico, Scotland, England and Northwestern Europe, European Jewish, Portugal, Northern African, Greece and Albania, Basque, Anatolia and the Caucasus. Well, all of that could be coming from the Mexican ancestry. There are a few that would be a little less likely in a sense, but in reality, it all makes sense because when you're talking about Mexico, you're talking about a lot of histories connecting to that. You're talking about Native American history connecting to that. You're talking about the Iberian history, which also then traces to the history of the Umayyad Caliphate, which then connects Iberia to North Africa and to the Middle East. So you're talking about Western Asia, as well as different Mediterranean spots. Now, from the results, we can tell that you are a large amount of Indigenous American. Now, with the Indigenous Americas Mexico, we can obviously assign that very likely to your Mexican ancestry, but then we're also looking at 67% Indigenous Americas North, which I don't quite know how that's being defined. That's where that map comes in, where it shows the circles of where they would define Indigenous Americas North. But my guess is that probably touches into areas that would be part of Mexico today, or at the very least part of Mexico in times of different parts of its history. So with 79% of your ancestry being indigenous and then 21% of it being non-indigenous, if you have one grandparent who you think is fully European, that could explain it, but more than likely, I'm guessing that all of your grandparents have some sort of indigenous ancestry. And a big shout out to Big D Suleiman for answering the question in the comments. I should also mention, if anyone wants to be in here and comment on other posts, I may include you in the videos if I really like what you say. My Ancestry DNA results, I am Swede, and according to very lazy family researchers through what Ancestry.com database has given me, which I should say, don't go off of just what you find on Ancestry when it comes to the family trees other people have built. Verify what you find. My oldest great or something grandparents on both sides are all Swedes back to at least early 1800s. Do have any chance find some more mixed background? Guessing you're trying to say, do I have any chance of finding some more mixed background? So we have 99% Sweden and Denmark, 1% Finland. I would say that there definitely is a chance that you could find more of a mixed background, because the thing about the DNA test with their admixtures is it's really only giving you a view of maybe the past 200 to 300 years. Sometimes you may hear as far back as 500 years. Part of it has to do with how old the generations are in your family. But basically, if you can start tracing your tree and connect it to much larger, well-researched trees, then you may be able to find a much more mixed background, because as you go further back, every generation, the amount of ancestors you has doubled. So once you get back a couple hundred years, you're looking at thousands of ancestors every generation. So it's very likely that there is going to be some sort of a mixture of something in there. But then the question becomes, will you ever be able to find it? And that's really hard to tell, because if you do have it traced back to the 1800s, or it's only traced back to the 1800s, you technically have a lot more work to do, because with your DNA results, you're looking at the past 200-300 years. So you really want to get back to like the 1700s to feel fairly confident, but even further back, that's even better. So I guess the simple way to put it is, if you can keep tracing your ancestry back, and if you go far back enough, you may be able to find it, but more than likely, you're not going to find that much more of a mix within the past 200 to 300 years in your family tree. How on earth can I share 3.59% of DNA with my first cousin? It is highly unlikely that this is a case of mispaternity. Her mom and my mom are sisters, and my grandpa is almost definitely their dad. Now, for 3.59%, it is a little bit low for first cousin, but that's assuming that it's a full first cousin. So one way you can tell the expected amount of DNA you should share with certain relatives, you can go to DNApainter.com and then go to the shared centimorgan tool. So here's the tool, and it shows you a basic periodic table sort of setup that shows every single relation and what type of a range you should expect. So here we see first cousin. So we see that we have it ranging all the way down from about 400 all the way up to just over 1,400, with most about 900. Now, this is talking about centimorgans, which is a measurement of DNA. 23andMe usually gives a percentage, although you can find the centimorgan amount. But one beautiful thing is you can go over here, enter percent. Now I think it was 3.59%, so 3.59. And then when we look at that, it gives us a table of what kind of relations we should expect. And one thing that we do see is we see half first cousins. And it pulls up the histogram for that, showing the amount of expected centimorgans. So the amount we entered is 267 centimorgans. So we see it is on the lower end of things, but it is certainly possible. So going back, part of what you said was her mom and my mom are sisters, and my grandpa is almost definitely their dad. So to me, that says that there's a question of, are they actually having the same father? Now I'm assuming that they do have the same mother. If they don't have the same mother and you know that they only share a father, then this totally makes sense. If you believe that they share the same parents, then that may be a MPE, misattributed parental event, what also is known as an NPE, so a non-paternity event. But they all basically just mean that the ancestor that you were expecting is not the actual ancestor. So the way to tell with this is to actually look at your matches and look at the matches for this first cousin. And you need to see, are they both getting cousins who were from the grandfather's side? So as an example, if your grandfather had any siblings and their descendants tested, you should expect them to come up as DNA matches for both you and your first cousin. If they're coming up for just you and not for your first cousin, then that means that the first cousin's mother probably had a different father. Now, if they're matching your first cousin's kit and not matching your kit, then that means that your mother's father is likely a different person. So unfortunately, this might be one of those cases where a skeleton in the closet might be coming out. Now, I did scroll down and I saw that the OP said my cousin and I share the same DNA matches on my grandpa's family, and so does my mom, who's also done a test. So I highly doubt this is mispaternity. Now, if it is the case that both you and the cousin are matching the cousins that you would expect through your grandfather's family, then are you getting the same matches through your grandmother's family? Which then goes back to the question, is it only known that they have the same father and not the same mother, or are they expected full biological sisters? And then one last possibility is that you and this first cousin, just through the randomness of recombination, just happen to not have the amount of DNA shared that you would expect for first cousins. I do see that your mom tested, so how much is your mom matching your first cousin? Is your mom actually matching your first cousin at the expected niece-nephew level, or is it what you would expect for a half niece or nephew? Okay, next one. So here we have one very in-depth. DNA matches not adding up. Okay, so we see MA, Miss Alexander, and IL are all people who, to my knowledge, I should not be related to. And looking here, we see MA at 1,591 centimorgans. We see Miss Alexander, 886 centimorgans, and IL, 784 centimorgans. So it seems they know the other three matches on here, which are from the paternal grandmother's side. My maternal grandmother seemed quite nervous about it, so I've just decided not to bring it up again. I snooped on Facebook and found my maternal grandmother is friends with the woman managing MA's account. Of course, I didn't say anything about it. I do have an idea of what it could be, but I'm not sure. My maternal grandfather is a quarter Danish on paper, and my aunt, who comes up on 23andMe as a half aunt, is roughly 1/8 Scandinavian. My mother is 0%. I also have no through lines with matches on his side. It would make sense that MA is my biological grandfather, but who could the others be to me? Side note, there are numerous other unexplained relatives that I share with them at 6%, 5%, 4%. So most likely you're right, these are matches through your biological grandfather. Now for MA at 1,591 centimorgans, which is 23%, that's right on the money for a grandparent. And we do see MA as a male. If MA is of the right age, it certainly makes sense. Even more so if your grandmother is actually friends with him on Facebook. My guess with these other ones is that they are probably MA's grandchildren, being that one has the last name Alexander and MA, I'm guessing maybe Alexander. This is one thing that we do commonly when we're doing DNA matches, we don't always get the names, and we do need to look into it and figure out a family tree, which is difficult because you're not going to find records. You have to go through Facebook, Twitter, been verified. You may have to do that to build the tree, although it sounds like you're already kind of doing that kind of snooping. But one thing that I am noticing right off the bat is that they are all supplying some sort of a tree. Whether or not there's any information that you can really get out of it may be difficult, especially with MAs and Alexanders. But with IL, that's 560 people. So my guess is that if you look at that tree, that's going to give you the best idea. And you said that there's a bunch of other matches who are matching them as well. Well, see how you can possibly connect those other matches into this tree. So it sounds like you already know what's going on here. It's just a matter of actually digging in to figure it all out for sure. But certainly a difficult situation, especially when you really do have to consider the feelings of the rest of your family and, not wanting to push the boundaries too much. All right, so here we have my ethnicity results. I am Brazilian. My father family is in Brazil for many generations, before that Portugal, north mostly, but also Madeira and Azores. My mother is from southern Brazil, and her father was 100% Italian. Her mother was half German, southwest. The other half we don't know. And here we have what you would expect based on what you said. Now, the OP actually commented down below a lot more about the family, and basically what it comes down to is they know a lot about their family tree. They've done the research. She even says, but exactly what you could comment, I don't know. I will most likely find any input interesting. Thank you a lot. So we have a big mix. We're getting Portugal, France, Spain, southern Italy, northern Italy, Aegean Islands, England and Northwest Europe, Scotland, Baltics, Balkans, Southern Bantu peoples, interesting, Indigenous Americas, Panama and Costa Rica, Senegal, and then Indigenous Americas, Colombia and Venezuela. It definitely seems that the ancestry in your family doesn't have a whole lot of Indigenous American mixed in, as at least as much as I would necessarily expect for someone of Brazilian ancestry, but you certainly do have it in there, be it, I think it's 2%. So you're looking at, if you're looking for a Native American ancestor, it would be pretty far back, but knowing the history, my guess is it probably traces back to the early years of the Portuguese and the Spanish in the New World. So you're looking at, if you can trace your family tree back to, the 1500s, the 1600s, that's probably where you're going to find that Native American ancestry. Although it could be a little bit closer, but that would also be assuming that all of it's coming from just one ancestor. For the Italian, it definitely makes sense. You said your mother was from southern Brazil and her father was 100% Italian. So that means that you would expect about 25%, which is probably made up by a lot of the other smaller readings that are in there from Europe. And then half German, Southwest, the other half we don't know. That's probably where you're getting the France in there because of the difficulty between determining French and German. So what that could indicate is if they were German, you do mention Southwest. Yep, that makes sense. You're looking at the region right near France. More than likely, most of that German ancestry is coming from that southwestern region. So based on everything you said, it certainly makes a lot of sense. But you're right, there's not much to comment on it because you do already know your family tree and it seems to match up with the results. So I am African American. I wasn't too surprised about my results for the most part, except for the native ancestry. I didn't expect to have any at all. But what I am really confused about is the North African and West Asian ancestry. We see 89.3% sub-Saharan African. Let's look at the full image. Okay, so we have sub-Saharan African, 89.3%, West African, Nigerian. Then we have a whole mix of different African. Then we have 7.8% European, all of that seemingly Northwestern European. And then let's see, 1.9% East Asian and Indigenous American, so Native American, and 0.7% Western Asian and North African, and looking at a lot of trace results. So it is kind of difficult to tell where is that Western Asian and North African. At 0.7%, it is a trace result, so that means our confidence on whether or not it is truly from a Western Asian, North African ancestry. We're not sure. The confidence is low, but it's not gone. Then when we do look at the rest of your mix, you have a mix of a lot, and you do have some ancestries that do touch into North African and Western Asian communities in different ways. So it could be mixtures of that. But the thing that really stands out to me is that you have 1.9%, basically 2% Native American. It does say Chinese, South Asian, Filipino, Austronesian, 0.1%, but more than likely that's really just a misreading. That should be Native American. And at 2% Native American, that means that if you build out your family tree and you're able to identify every single one of your second great grandparents, or even better, your third great grandparents, you more than likely will find a Native American ancestor somewhere in there. Now, for the last one on this video, this came up a bit more recently than the others, so there's a lot of others to review for more videos. But this one just stood out to me because I knew how to answer it really well and I thought it'd be fun. So here we have DNA Match's opinion on possible relationship. I've been doing research on my grandmother's mother's family. However, a major brick wall in my research has been my great-great-grandfather, Frank Stasilius. I had my grandmother test on Ancestry to see if any DNA matches could possibly link to Frank, and after a while I was able to connect several matches to that side of the family. Interestingly, I noticed that a sizable group of these matches descend from one person named Nellie. This chart image that I posted is a quick attempt to map everything out. My question is, given the amount of centimorgans seen with these DNA matches, what would be, in your opinion, the most likely relationship between Nellie and Frank? So the best thing to do here is use a tool known as What Are the Odds? And this is a free tool on DNA Painter. So we're going to go back to that website. So here I've pulled up the page for a blank What Are the Odds version 2 beta tool. So what we're going to do is we're going to recreate this tree that they've built in What Are the Odds, and then we're going to suggest hypothesis, and that's how we're going to figure out where is the grandmother fitting into the family tree most likely.
Moments later.
So I've built out the tree now in What Are the Odds, and you can see that I just included what we know exactly how they're related, because even though E, L, and C are part of this family as well, we have a lot of other matches and we don't know how they're connected, so having them in there is not going to help. Because what this tool is doing is it's going to then take all of this into consideration and determine what's the most likely places where your grandmother is going to fit within this family tree. So the family tree of Nellie, in a sense. Now, preferably if we had a birth year, it would be best. I'm actually going to put in 1930. Being that your grandmother tested, I'm guessing that she is alive, or at least recently alive, and probably born 1920s to maybe 1940s. So we're just going to go with 1930, and people can do this all the time. If we had the ages for these people or their birth dates, that would also be useful to put in. You just go and hover over, add edit details, you can put it in there. But now we just hit suggest hypotheses. And now it's going to suggest every single place in which your grandmother might fit into this family tree. So we see that there are a lot of hypotheses. Now we can rule out a lot of stuff based on ages. The hypothesis, that's basically where the grandmother might be. So it's hypothesizing the grandmother might be here. And the scores that we see, they vary a lot. And what this score tells us is just how strong that hypothesis is in comparison to the other hypotheses. The best thing you want for a very strong score, it should be at least 20 times more than the next lowest score. So if you look at two hypotheses and one is 20 times more than the other in its score, you can be very confident that that hypothesis is much more likely. If they are less than 20 times, then they're actually going to be a lot more closer in possibility. But going through, we're going to clean up some more of this just to, make it a little bit easier on ourselves. So it's very doubtful that the grandmother's here, so we can delete this. Very doubtful the grandmother's here as well, so we can delete this. And so I'm going to go through and I'm going to clean up a lot of it, and then we're going to take a look at it once it's cleaned up.
One eternity later.
So now we have a much cleaner picture. And one of the things we want to do from here, what I like to do is I like to determine what's the most likely generation we would find, your grandmothers. So going back, as I said, we're assuming that your grandmother is the same generation as this generation right here. So Patricia, Kay, father and mother, the grandmother's same there. So one of Nellie's grandchildren. So when we look at the hypotheses that are within that generation, this is where we're looking. And what's the strongest one out of those three? We have this, 925. But is it 20 times stronger than the next hypothesis? No, it's not. It's a little bit less. So those are kind of even. We're leaning towards hypothesis 3, but both are quite likely. But it's not like hypothesis 3 is that much stronger than hypothesis 8. But they are both much, much, much stronger than hypothesis 12, which is only a score of 1. So more than likely what we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for a sibling of Nellie. So when we go back here, we see that we have Nellie and you have the father, George Leska. Well, build out all of those siblings. But this isn't the only possibility that she's going to be in this generation. So with it being your grandmother, I'm guessing born 1930s, like we said. So we're going to look at an older generation instead of a younger generation, just because I would think it could be a bit more possible to be the older generation. So then we do the same thing. We look at this generation and our two strongest scores are right here. Hypothesis 7 and hypothesis 11. Once again, same scores as the 3 versus 8, so same strengths. Both of those are much stronger than hypothesis 2 and hypothesis 14. So now we're looking at, it could be a half sibling of Nellie's, or they could be a descendant of one of Nellie's aunts or uncles. So we would then want to do, at the very least, in building out the tree, we would look at all of Nellie's siblings, and then we would look at all of Nellie's parent siblings and trace out those family trees. So when I say that, I mean, pull up all the siblings, find if they had a spouse, find if they had children, and build those down. And as you go through it, the hope is that you would then eventually find a connection to your family tree. But we have all of these hypotheses to consider. They are all possible, except for hypothesis 1, because it has a score of 0. So when you see that score of 0, it's not possible. But if it's a score of 1 and you have another score of 925, yeah, that 925 score is going to be a lot more likely, but there's still possible. I hope you all enjoyed this new style of video. I will definitely be doing at least a couple more of these, and if people really enjoy them, I'm hoping to make this a continual series, especially because I know so many people send me messages and comments and are asking me to look at what they have, and I just don't always have the time, so me making content out of it gives me the ability to look at your ancestry and help all of you out, even if it's just in little bits here and there. So if you did enjoy, be sure to comment below, tell me that you want me to do more of these, give this video a like, and then I'll know to definitely do a lot more. And if you'd like to learn more about what are the odds in DNA Painter tools, check out this link right here, this tutorial I made.